Hello and welcome to another episode on Maritime Radar. The Cabotage Act was passed into law on the 30th of April 2003 with the objective that it will stimulate the development of indigenous capacity in the Nigerian maritime industry and bring to an end foreign dominance in Nigeria's coastal trade. The implementation of this act was to rest on these four pillars. Cabotage vessels must be built by Nigerian shipyards, be wholly owned by Nigerians, must be operated by Nigerians, and lastly, must be registered in Nigeria. 20 years after, has the Act been able to fulfill its mandate to empower indigenous shipping companies? These and many other issues we will find out in this episode. Repositioning Africa's maritime industry, growth and sustainability are some of the issues that will be on the front burner on Maritime Radar. I'm Nneoma Obi-Asualo. As of today, about 60% of coastal trade in Nigeria is being handled by foreign operators. The Cabotage Vessel Financing Fund, CVFF, comes with immense benefits, which includes the development of Nigeria's maritime industry, and it is to provide finance to Nigerian shipping companies to acquire vessels for use in the coastal trade, encourage indigenous participation, create jobs, improve safety and security of the Nigerian maritime industry, boost economic growth, and also promote self-sufficiency. Amidst these huge benefits, it's sad to also mention that not all indigenous shipping service providers are eligible for the loan, according to the law that established the fund. Eligible applicants must have been paying the capital dues of 2% surcharge, license and waiver. The company must also have contracts with international firms with a positive cash flow and bankable feasibility reports, which shall be verified by the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA, and the primary lending institutions.
Africa needs its own storytellers, people who understand the continent because they're from it. People who know that news is more than just a conversation starter, it's our stories. Because these stories run deeper than headlines and segments. It's about digging deeper to get the facts and telling the human side of every single story, not just the echoes from foreign headlines and perspectives. It's time to take back our narratives and share them in our voices. The birth of Africa's New Age reporting. And this is where it begins, right here, News Central TV, the stories that put Africa first.
If you're just joining us, this is Maritime Radar. Nigeria made a bold attempt to change the face of maritime business within its coast when it enacted the Coastal and Inland Shipping Cabotage Act in 2003. This week's episode will assess the act and the funds 20 years after. I spoke to Foluke Akinmoladun, a maritime lawyer. Stay with us. Hello, Foluke. Good to have you on the show.
Hi, Nneoma. Great to be here.
The Cabotage Vessel Financing Fund, CVFF, was established alongside the Cabotage Act of 2003. 20 years after, take us through a critical assessment of the Act and the funds.
Okay, so thank you once again for having me. By way of introduction, my full name is Foluke Akinmoladun. I'm a maritime lawyer and accountant, and so I'll be speaking about the CVFF both from a legal and a finance perspective. So in order to understand the CVFF, we need to understand the law that provided for CVFF, which is the Cabotage Act of 2003. Now, before we talk about the reason for the Cabotage Act, let us understand what cabotage itself is. So cabotage is the carriage of goods and passengers within the territorial waters of a country. So for Nigeria, that will be 200 nautical miles seaward from the outlying coast of Nigeria. Why is the governance or the management of cabotage important? A country has sovereignty over its territory. So the jurisprudential basis for the Cabotage Act is Nigeria should be able to manage the activities within its territorial waters, particularly the vessels that bring in goods and take out goods from the Nigerian territorial waters, like I said, is 200 nautical miles. Now, stemming out of that, the Cabotage Act itself essentially addresses four major things. One, indigenous capacity, that is shipping. So the Act specifically says under Section 3 that any vessel that operates within the Nigerian territorial waters or is involved in cabotage trade must be owned by Nigerians, registered under the Nigerian flag, so a Nigerian registered ship. It should be manned by Nigerians that have Nigerian seafarers on it, and it should be built by Nigeria.
Those are the four pillars.
Those are the four pillars. So, but already when you look at the Nigerian indigenous capacity 18 years down the line, 20 years down the line actually, from 2003 to 2023, there are a number of those pillars that we already see that there are issues. So when you talk about ship ownership, the question is, how many ships do we have that are Nigerian owned? How many ships do we have that are Nigerian manned? How many ships do we have that are registered under the Nigerian flag? And then how many ships are built in Nigeria? So already there was, even in 2003, there was a gap in terms of local capacity. And one of the things that the Act addressed was a waiver for foreign vessels to operate within Nigerian waters to, one, protect their investments under the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission Act, and then two, to provide capacity where there is a lack of indigenous capacity. And that provision of the Act was actually to help ensure that the Nigerian maritime industry is not adversely affected during the time period within which Nigerian indigenous capacity can be built. In line with that as well was the creation of the CVFF fund. Now, under Section 43 of the Cabotage Act, and that's the Cabotage Act of 2003, and the Cabotage Vessel Financing Fund Regulations by Nneoma 2007, 2% of every cabotage activity within Nigerian territorial waters were to be paid into that CVFF. Okay. So as at the 11th of December 2002, that fund had increased to about $350 million and about 60 billion Nigerian naira. Now, I'm sure that sounds like good news. You know, we have a lot of money. There's a lot to gather from that kind of resource. But also remember that a vessel like a VLCC, which is a very large crude carrier, considering the fact that Nigeria is predominantly a crude exporter, can cost almost $200 million. So with one vessel, you can actually empty out CVFF. The other issue with the Cabotage Act, before I come to CVFF, is that the Cabotage Act did not provide for ship repair. So already, even from the time of the inception of the Act and the passage of the Act, there was already that lacuna with respect to ship repair yards. Now, in terms of building indigenous capacity, like I said, one of them is manning of the vessels by Nigerians. Now, seafaring is a major industry. The Philippines, for instance, in 2019 earned $6.14 billion from the remittances from their seafarers, who were just 380,000. So you can imagine, with Nigeria's population of 200 million and the number of people that live on our coastal areas, that is an easy catchment area for seafarers. Imagine how much foreign earnings we can make from that. The other thing with the Act, which is very laudable, is the fact that the building of indigenous capacity also would reduce capital flight. So in other words, Nigerians do not have to pay in forex for carrying their cargo. And Nigeria is a major cargo nation.
Because we are import dependent.
We're import dependent, exactly. Now, but the challenge is that with lack of indigenous capacity as far as shipping is concerned, Nigerians are left at the whims and caprices of foreign vessels and whatever freight rates that they give. and also with the challenges of demurrage that comes with that. And demurrage is further exasperated by the fact that your ports, your major ports, Apapa and Tinkan, do not have a very free-flowing traffic from the port to the warehouses. So it's already expensive bringing the goods in, and it's also expensive trying to get the goods out of the ports. Now, the other aspect of the Cabotage Act has to do with not providing things like pioneer status for people who are buying ships for the first time, or any form of tax waiver that would have also helped for indigenous ship owners who want to buy ships. And these are part of the things that I feel should be considered. Interestingly, in March of last year, the NIMASA, the main body with respect to the management of the Cabotage Act and CVFF, actually called for memoranda on the review of the Cabotage Act. So there's currently a bill before the Nigerian National Assembly, the legislative body, to review the provisions of the Cabotage Act. And I do hope that some of the things they will look into is, one, add ship repair yards into that, add tax issues, that's tax waiver, sorry, and also consider aspects of shipping where they can make ship owners enjoy pioneer status, just sort of having a tax waiver for a number of years while they are building indigenous capacity.
So these are the challenges you've already noticed from the CVFF, from the Act itself. So what are the set objectives of the Act?
Okay, so apart from the 4 pillars that I mentioned, it also created CVFF. Now, CVFF, apart from the issue of the funds, CVFF has 2 major parties. So under the CVFF regulations 2007, there is the contributory party and the eligible party. I will start from the eligible party because that's easier to understand. The eligible party are those who, under the regulations and under the Act, have are eligible to access the funds. Now, contributory parties are more or less like the fund managers. So you have the fund managers, you have NIMASA, you have the primary lending institution, and you have the beneficiary of the fund itself. CVFF was meant to help Nigeria increase the number of ships it has. And so it's important to understand the history.
So that's one of the objectives.
The main objective of CVFF is increase the number of ships Nigerians have in its simplest form. But let's trace back, because the question then becomes, how come it hasn't been disbursed all this while? And so when we want to talk about
looking at the immense benefits,
exactly, immense benefits, we have to step back a bit and look at the Nigerian National Shipping Line, which was 100% acquired by the Nigerian government in 1961, but was then liquidated in 1995, where the Nigerian government sold the whole 21 vessels in the fleet because of issues of management, and of course a lot of the vessels were being arrested in different parts of the world for unpaid bills. Now, in the 70s and the 80s, the government tried to fund indigenous ship owners individually, and unfortunately that again didn't go too well, because many of those who accessed the funds, one, were not necessarily people who were vast in understanding the shipping business, and secondly, there was no proper monitoring as at that time with respect to the funds. So a lot of the funds were disbursed without the commensurate results that were expected to build the industry. So you can understand the government's reluctance to just disburse the funds again, especially when you think of $350 million. But that being said, CVFF still is the largest fund that Nigerian ship owners can actually access to be able to build capacity. And we must commend the Nigerian government with respect to both the Cabotage Act and keeping those funds, because it's very possible for the funds also to be mismanaged and not be there when the ship owners actually need it. Because I understand a number of African countries have actually approached Nigeria to ask them, how have you done it? And these are things that we have discovered, particularly when I worked with the transportation work stream on implementing AFTA in Nigeria. That was where, you know, a number of us got to understand that even though Nigeria may not be where it wants to be, it's far ahead of a number of African countries, and there is still a lot that we can teach in terms of what can be done and the lessons to be learned from our own mistakes.
We'll be able to understand what the Cabotage Act is and the CVFF funds. We've also been able to know the challenges around it and the set objectives. But we will go on a short break. When we return, Maritime Radar continues. Please stay with us.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
If you are just joining us, this is Maritime Radar, and I still have with me in the studio Foluke Akinmoladun. She is a maritime lawyer. Before we went on that break, you've been able to establish what the Cabotage Act is, the set objectives and the challenges it has. So now we'll move on to see, in your view, how can we make the CVFF efficient?
Okay, I think that the CVFF can be made efficient with a few reviews to the legislation that created both the CVFF and the Cabotage Act. And this is how I mean. One of the major risks that the government faces with disbursement of CVFF is the mismanagement of the funds. So how do we address this risk? I suggest that the CVFF, rather than being a disbursement fund, should be a collateral. And when I say a collateral, how do I mean? The same way you have sovereign wealth bonds that are used as collateral for certain forms of investments, CVFF can be used as a collateral for ship owners, indigenous ship owners, to go out into the international market, in the international bond and equities markets, and get financiers into their business. Now, why would that address the issue of the risk of mismanagement? As far as professionalism is concerned, you are sure that it's the actual ship owners who know their business and who know the operations of the business that are the ones who are seeking for the funds. So the shipping activities essentially is governed by ship ownership, manning of the vessels, insurance. And when you talk about insurance, you're talking about H&M, hull and machinery, and you're talking about P&I, protection and indemnity clubs. That's third-party claims against the ship. All of these areas are highly specialized areas. And so it is important that those who know and understand operations are the ones who are actually going out to the market to get these funds. So the first issue of the funds going to the wrong persons is eliminated, because the ship owners are the ones then looking for their funds. The other risk is the risk of lack of monitoring, which I mentioned earlier was one of the reasons why in the 70s and 80s there were problems with the funds. Monitoring can be done between the international financiers and the domestic banks that some of these funds are going to be domiciled in. Now, that is one aspect of it. The other aspect is asset financing, where the international financiers fund the shipyards that build the ships directly, such that the ship owner is only receiving the ship and no funds are directly given to the ship owner. Or for a second-hand vessel, the international financiers pay the seller directly, and then the Nigerian ship owner only receives the ship. And the repayment with respect to the asset acquisition is then done on the basis that the domestic and the international financiers have a schedule of repayments that they monitor on a monthly basis, and can very well send a monthly report to NEMASA telling them this is the stage of operations as far as this fund is concerned. Now, the other thing with the shipping market that we need to understand is that it is cyclical. So cargoes like grain, like wheat, it is post-harvest season that you have those kind of cargoes. Some other cargoes, because of the areas that they come from, there are certain times of the year you wouldn't want to pass those waters, maybe because it's too risky for the ship, because of icebergs and the likes. And so there, for different cargo types, there are different, of course, different freight rates. There are also different cycles. So a particular shipping cargo might be less carried in this particular time of year and more carried in another particular time of year. And those are the type of cycles that international financiers that are specialized in shipping finance would have an understanding of. So it is easier for them to understand that, okay, in this particular month, we're not expecting the ship owner to be able to fund these loans because of the way the markets are. These are the months that we expect them to be able to actually fund the loans. So that way the ship owner is also not under undue pressure to make those disbursements, because they are being funded by financiers that understand how their business runs.
Okay, these are laudable recommendations on how we can best disperse or use this CVFF funds.
Yeah.
But the problem, someone will say, is in the implementation or the political will to be able to follow through this recommendation you just made. So what will be your recommendations again on how to implement this?
In terms of the political will, I think one of our biggest help would be the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Okay. In addition to AFTA, which is the acronym for the Trade Area Agreement, there's also AIMS, that's the African Integrated Maritime Strategy of 2050. There's also the African Union Agenda 2063, a wealthy Africa for all, the slogan for it. And why are these our help in terms of political will? AFTA as a support, in addition to the African Integrated Maritime Strategy of 2050, along with the African Union 2063, a prosperous Africa for all, gives Nigeria the opportunity to have the political will to do what it needs to do to increase intra-Africa trade. And so you have the Council of Ministers under AFTA, where I believe it's on a quarterly basis. Ministers come together to give a scorecard of what their country has been doing in terms of promoting intra-Africa trade. So currently, intra-Africa trade is between 7 to 15%, which is the lowest in the world. And we are hoping that by 2030, that would increase significantly to at least 20-25%. And by 2050, we'll see that increase to about 50%. Now, what does this do in terms of building the political will? You don't want a situation where the Nigerian minister comes to a meeting of the Council of Ministers and Rwanda is giving a stronger scorecard than Nigeria. You know, there's a bit of competition, and that's the beauty of competition. So there's a lot of hope that now that countries are having to essentially explain their position as far as AFTA is concerned, it would encourage the government to be able to put in the necessary steps to ensure that the Cabotage Act works, and of course CVFF works efficiently. The other aspect of it is also the blue economy, how to maximize the wealth of the oceans. And the African Union also has the blue economy 2050 blueprint in helping African countries maximize the wealth they get from the oceans. So when you combine this coastal trade, that's cabotage, with the fact that Nigeria has over almost 10 times the length of its coastal waters in its internal waterways, that easily puts Nigeria in a position to make the maritime sector the biggest contributor of non-oil export to Nigerian GDP, if we focus on ensuring that the industry is allowed to thrive and is allowed to flourish. The other aspect of it as well is that Nigeria stands to gain as being the central hub for West African trade. So we're surrounded by landlocked countries who can easily use Nigeria's coastal waterways to increase the cargo that come into their countries. So like Niger, like Chad, to some extent Cameroon. And we also are in a position through our internal waterways to increase domestic trade within Nigeria as well. A number of dry ports have been set up. We have Ibadan, we have Kaduna, and I think there will be one coming up in Kano soon, if I'm not mistaken. And what that is going to help is that not only will the development of maritime trade increase internationally and increase Nigerian shippers in trading with African waters, but also increases our capacity for trade domestically as well. And so getting it right with CVFF, getting it right with the Cabotage Act can significantly increase Nigeria's foreign earnings and, of course, domestic earnings as well that can come from the maritime industry.
I must thank you most kindly for coming on the program. Those have been wonderful recommendations from the maritime lawyer, Foluke Akinmoladun. I must thank you most kindly for coming on the program, as I hope that the government of Nigeria will be able to work on these recommendations to make the maritime industry a better one. Thank you again for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
This is Africa. I bet you've heard a lot about it. But this is what you need to know. It's the home of the youngest and fastest growing population in the world. This, my friend, is opportunity right here. This is the future, and everyone wants Africa's attention. You need a voice that's African, young, conversational, a platform with the potential to reach millions of people across the continent with content they can relate to, such as lifestyle shows, sports and news, just the way they love it. Imagine all the people you could be talking to on News Central TV. Well, don't just think about it. Contact us for sponsorship and advert bookings. Put your brand where Africa is watching. It's News Central TV.
And that's how we draw our curtain on this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Every week, join us on Maritime Radar as we explore how Africa can make a difference in ensuring the development of the maritime sector. You can also expect the latest in maritime news and industry insights right here. I'm Nneoma Obi-Asualo. Many thanks for your time.